Thank you for the kind introduction, Debbie, and thank you, the organizers, for the invitation. And thank you all for attending, both in person and online. I hear there's a lot of people online. So what I'm going to tell you about in this session is about review articles. And so I was hoping that this could be interactive. So if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or type online and interrupt me throughout the whole thing. Like, that's totally fine. We can just have a conversation about the topic, and then I'll ask you questions, right? So don't be shy about raising your hand, because I'm very good at waiting for people to ask questions. So we'll have a lot of quiet if you don't ask questions and have a conversation with me. So I don't have any formal training in writing review articles, just full disclosure. I've been writing a lot of review articles, and so I put them up here just to show sort of, what I'm telling you is just things that I've learned over the years writing and co-authoring a lot of review articles, right? So, are there other ways to do things besides what I'm going to tell you about? Absolutely, right? I'm just going to share things that I found that work for me, and hopefully, you can take away something that'll help you. And so the first few of these, I was a graduate student when I wrote them, and I learned a lot from my advisor. And the rest of these, I've been working with PhD students to write and sort of helping them write and learn how to write. And then also, I learn something every time we do one of these. So that's the beauty of academics. You just constantly learn, and I find that really exciting. Okay, so to start with, so what is a review article? Okay, so it's a summary of a topic, right? And it's sort of like purest essence. A review article is just that. It reviews something, an area, a research area, an area of chemistry, an area of biology, an area of physics, whatever your topic is. It's reviewing that area, right? And that's really nice. It's especially nice for people that are starting in a field, right? It's really difficult to read everything that's ever been published, but it's a lot easier to read a summary, right? So this is really it's a service to the scientific community to write these reviews, because you're helping people that are new learn, at a first glance, what's going on in the field. It's not primary literature, right? So the difference between primary literature and a review article: primary literature is someone did research and they published that research, and it's very specific, and it's all about that research project that they did. And so, that research project, that primary literature, will be summarized, right, in a review article. And so, like I said, these are really great for introducing people into a new research area. Also, right, so that's one area, is sort of, writing something to introduce a topic to new people. The other thing is they can catalog things, right? So some fields, there's just so much data. And so you could write a review article that really just, catalogs all of this and keeps track of it. And so there's this record in literature of us, all of this literature together, right? That's not the kind of review article that you'd give a new student to introduce to a field, because they would just fall asleep reading it, right? But someone that's an expert in the field would find this type of review article and say, oh, now I want to know, every single example of this kind of thing, and it's all there in one collection, in one spot, right? So when you're writing a review article, you want to think what your purpose is, right? And so every review article is a little bit different, and always think about talking to your audience and writing to your audience and knowing who your audience is. Now that everyone's warmed up, let's try this again, right? Why would you want to write a review article? There's no wrong answers, right? So let's just hear your thoughts. Why would you want to write a review article? Okay, you're smiling and making eye contact at me. So why do you think? To define a research gap. All right, that's a great reason to write a review article. All right, anybody else? Yeah, so some reasons that I thought of, right? And learning a new area, right? So if I'm doing research in lanthanide chemistry and I want to apply that to, waste recycling, then, a really good way to get into that is to just do a deep dive in the literature. And if you're doing that for the purpose of writing a review article, you tend to focus your reading more and really learn a lot, because you have to to teach something, you learn it a lot better than just reading it from scratch. And so sometimes it'll help people learn an area. So oftentimes, with second year, third year PhD students, I'll have them write a review article for the purpose of, them just immersing themselves in the literature of a topic. And that's really helpful, I find. And, another is if you're doing a PhD or a master's and you have to write an introduction chapter to contextualize your own research, well, if it's a good enough chapter, you might think about publishing it as a review article, right? And then you get another publication on your CV. So I would say more than half of the PhD students that have come through my lab have published the first chapter of their thesis or a part of it as a review article. And that's good for the community. It's good for the student. There's a lot of good things that can come out of that. It's a lot more work than just writing a thesis chapter, though. So you have to keep that in mind, right? And sometimes you'll be invited, right? I get invited to write review articles on topics that I'm an expert on. And so, you have to think about why you're writing it. Okay. It's really important that you think about when you're writing a review article that you want to do something new, right? So you don't want to just repeat review articles that someone else has written, right? So the best way to avoid that is to start out by reading review articles in the area and just see what they do, right? Do they summarize a certain aspect of a topic? Do they catalog things? What's the purpose of their review articles, right? What's the scope of what they're covering? And then when you're writing a review article, do something different, right? You can cover the same material, but with a different vantage point, right? So if I'm an inorganic chemist, right? So I'm thinking about ligands and metals binding. And so maybe there's a really great review article about, these metal complexes from the perspective of the ligand and changing the ligand. Well, maybe it would be useful for the same field to have a review article written from the perspective of the metals instead of from the perspective of the ligands, right? So you can cover the same scientific material, but from a different vantage point. And that really gives people it opens up people's minds to thinking about science in different ways. And I think that's really useful to the scientific community, right? Another difference that you could have is time. So if the definitive review article in a field covers 1900 to 2015, and there's been nothing reviewed since then, well, maybe there's a need to cover 2015 to the present. And so that could be where you're different, right? And you can say, look, if you want to learn about things older than this, go read this review article. But what I'm writing now is covering this new time period. And so there's lots of ways to write something new. And I think that's a really important thing to do. So you don't want to just repeat what's out there already. Okay, so it's important also to follow the instructions. Either you're invited or you're thinking this review article will be good for a certain journal, and you reach out to the editor to see if you can publish it there, or maybe you're just going to send it into the journal, right? Journals have very specific instructions on what they want, and every journal is a little bit different, right? How many people here have submitted a paper to a journal? Everyone in the front. Anybody in the back? No? Okay. So when you do, what you want to do is go to the journal's website, right? So this is an ACS website here, and there's a scope of journal. They tell you about how to submit, how to format, how to make your figures the right way, right? There's so many instructions. So the first time a student in my lab publishes a paper, whether it's a review article or primary literature, I have them download all the instructions for authors and highlight every single thing that they have control over, and then make sure that they put a check next to it before we submit the paper that they followed all the instructions. But one of the most important things, I think, for a review article specifically, other than following all the instructions, is to think about your target audience, right? What journal are you writing to? Who reads that journal? And you can often find that information in what's called the scope of the journal. They'll say, what area you're writing to, whether it's a broad audience of, all chemists or all scientists, or whether it's, a very specific audience of, astrophysicists. It'll tell you who you're writing to. And then, we're getting way ahead there. Okay, so, and it tells you what level to write to, right? If I'm writing an inorganic chemistry review article and I'm submitting it to the journal Inorganic Chemistry, Well, I don't need to put a lot of background information in there because the audience are inorganic chemists, and they're gonna. I don't want to like bore them to death in the first 3 pages because they know everything already. And but if I'm sending that same review article to chemical reviews or some broad audience, I'm going to put more background information in there because a lot of the audience members won't know that information, right? So you really have to tailor this to the different audiences that you're submitting to, and reading the instructions before you start will help save you a lot of time and rejection in the end. There's always rejection. I get rejected all the time. Everyone does, but you can minimize how much you're rejected by following the instructions and writing to your target audience. Okay, so the other thing, and this blows students' minds when I tell them this, right? I have people start like a year in advance on a review article. It is so much work you would not believe. This is not writing a report for a class that you're going to write the night before class. It's before it's due and turn it in. Right. This is going to be peer reviewed by scientists around the world. It's going to be critiqued. It's going to be published. It's going to be out there in the literature. It's not just going to your professor's desk and they're going to mark it up and give you a grade. So this has to be really, really well done, and that takes a lot of time, especially for a review article, because you have to, sometimes you have to read 50 papers to know enough about a topic to write the perfect sentence, right, or the perfect paragraph, and that just takes a lot of time and reading and setting aside time to read. So I usually have students, dedicate time each day in a calendar to, I'm going to read, for this block of time, right? And so the literature search, I would say probably half the time for writing a review article is just searching for literature, and I'll talk more about that in a couple of slides. But there's so much literature, you got to search all of these ways, and that just takes a lot of time. But once you read all of that, then you can, it's almost written in your mind already what you want to say, and then it's a lot of effort in writing drafts, preparing figures, doing editing, proofreading, and then very important for review articles is reference checking, right? You're sending out something that people are going to use to introduce to a field. If your references are all incorrect, then that's a worthless document you're doing a disservice to the community. And so, yeah, I put this like stopwatch. People think that, oh, I'm just going to write this really quickly, but no, it turns into months. And so, a rule that I have in my lab is I want to see, especially if we have a deadline, I want to see a draft a month before it's due. Right? I like to see drafts of little sections as we go because I think it's easier to do that in pieces. But I think we should have the entire thing drafted. It can be kind of crude, but like some material in every section of the review a month in advance. And that gives us a month to really polish it, make sure it's well written, make sure it's all correct, make sure the references are correct. And that tends to be really, really useful. And that's, I think, very surprising to students. If they're like, oh, this is due, April 15th. Let's get it done by April 14th. But no, let's get it done, a month before that. Okay, so again, there's no right or wrong answers. So let's get 3 people to give me guesses. How many references do you need for a review article? Or how would you even know? How many people have read a review article? You've read a review article. How many references do you think you need in a review article? Yeah. So 3? 20. Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay. So it could be 20. It might not be 20. So the answer is it depends, right? So when you're thinking about this, you really want to, again, think about your target audience, right? So if I'm saying this theme over and over again, it's because it encompasses a lot of aspects of writing a review article. So if you're writing to a journal that publishes many reviews, right? Look at all of the reviews that journal's published in the last 2 years, right? Pick 5 or 10 review articles that they published. See how many references they have. If they're between 20 and 100, and then 20 is probably okay. If they're between 100 and 500, 20 is probably not enough. And so, oh, jumping ahead here. Okay, so what you want to think about in terms of this is, you want to fit into the area that you're trying to publish in, right? And so that's going to be that particular journal. Also, right, how many do you need to cover your topic, right? So you've picked this topic, this area, and let's say you only have 20 papers. There's no other papers in the literature, right? So if you read a comprehensive review of an entire field, it only has 20 references, okay? But the journal you're trying to publish in, they tend to have 100, 200, 500 references. Then maybe you need to expand the scope of your review to be consistent with what that journal's doing, right? Or, if to cover what you want to cover, you need 500 references, but the journal tends to have reviews between 20 and 50 references. Well, maybe you need to just like take a sliver of that area and just review a smaller section, right? Or send it to a different journal. So the answer, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's whatever you need to do what you're trying to do in your review, but you also want to make sure that that fits with where you're trying to do it in terms of which journal. Okay, and so yeah, like I said, you might need to adjust the breadth or the what the topic that you're presenting to make it longer or shorter, depending on where you're trying to fit this story. I swear I've used one of these before. Okay. All right, literature search. Who's done a literature search before, right? This is the first part, the part that I said was most time consuming. So raise your hand if you've ever searched for literature. No one said. Few people have. Okay, I already called on you, so you're safe. How do you search for literature? You've done a literature search. What do you use the internet? What do you use? Oh, I'm looking with the glasses. I don't know your name. Google's okay, great. Google Scholar and PubMed are both on my list, right? And yeah, so that's great. Yeah, so you find keywords and you use whatever databases you have available, right? And so I'll show you some of my favorite ones and why I like different ones for different purposes. Okay, so PubMed, one of my favorites. I do some research relating chemistry to medical imaging. And so PubMed has a lot of health related articles, right? And it's, if you're doing anything biochemical, biomedical, biological, bio whatever, PubMed's a great place to look. And a really nice thing about PubMed is if the research is sponsored by the US federal government, then people are required to put free versions of their articles on PubMed. So there's often links, like you can get stuff on PubMed for free if your library doesn't have access. And so that's really, really useful, I think. And then the forward one. Working. Okay. SciFinder. I really like SciFinder. So our university has a subscription. So SciFinder is really good for chemistry, right? So if you're not doing chemical research, this probably isn't a good place to look. But oftentimes I'll find things on SciFinder that I won't find on Google Scholar or PubMed. And so it's really good for that. But what I really like SciFinder for is I can do structure searches. So if I'm writing a review on a particular class of ligands, I can draw the structure of the ligand in there, do a search, and find all the papers that have published that ligand. And so that's a really useful full source there. Web of Science, I like that a lot also. And I think a lot of what you can do on Web of Science, I think you can do on Google Scholar also. But I don't, maybe because I grew up scientifically using Web of Science, I tend to lean on that. But it's really good for sort of all areas of science. But it's also what I like to use it for the most is citation searching, right? So if I'm doing a literature search and I find an article that's just brilliant, I need to emphasize this article in my review, then I can say, okay, I can put it in here in Web of Science and say, who cited this paper? Do a citation search. because the people that cited that paper might also be doing things that I want to describe in my review. And so I can sort of look forward in time and grab papers that cite this really important paper, right? And so that Web of Science is really good for doing that kind of thing. And then Google Scholar, I think if I'd have given this talk 10 years ago, I wouldn't have included it, but now it's really good. So you can find all kinds of stuff on Google Scholar. But what's really important here is that if I did the same keyword search in all four of these search engines, I'll get a lot of overlap, but I'll find unique papers in all four of these. So, it's really important to, whatever you pick your keywords, search for them in multiple search engines. They call it exhaustive review because it's exhausting. You're just searching and searching and searching. And if you want to find everything in an area, searching multiple search engines is the way to go. Right. And then thinking about keywords, right? So you mentioned keywords. You want to think about not just picking one or two keywords, but think about any possible keyword that would fit the topic that you're looking at. Do multiple permutations of those keywords in different combinations in all of the search engines. And you'll find, a small change in the keyword, like maybe even a tense change in the word, will lead to different outcomes in your search. And so if you want to just find everything that's out there, there's a lot of different things that you can do. And I'm sure there's probably some AI algorithms that can help with this now, but I think that's a different talk that maybe you should have a different person give, because I've not done that before. And then, search through citations of authors. So if you find a really good article, see who's cited that article. Like I mentioned before, citation searches are great for finding new literature, and you'll get all kinds of ideas. I love doing stuff like this, like writing review articles, because every time I do it, I think I got like 5 or 6 new project ideas in my mind that we could try. And most of my ideas aren't very good, but every once in a while there's a really good one, and that leads to something outstanding, and a thesis project for a student or something. And it takes a lot of ideas to whittle down to some good ones. So just keep it a log of all your ideas. Okay, so in graphical form of what I just described in words, this is sort of what I'm talking about, right? So you get your paper, right? And I've sort of shown the paper here. There's a title, there's authors, and then there's all of the science in the paper that's blank here. Then you look in the references and you say, okay, which references in this paper are relevant to my review? And that's sort of backwards. So the papers that the authors in your paper that you're looking at cite, then you go and find those papers. And then you do the forward, who cited that paper, and you find all of those papers. And for every paper that you find, you're doing this process. And it's like this exponential finding of papers, and you'll at first be overwhelmed. Every paper that you read that you like will lead to 10, 12, 15 more papers in your stack that you have to sort through, right? And so you're just like growing and growing and growing your stack. But eventually you'll get to a point where you'll find a new paper, and maybe there's only 1 or 2 references that you haven't seen already because you've already seen them from the rest. Or you'll get to a point where, oh, yeah, they cite all these papers, or these people cite them, but I've already read all of those papers. Once you get to, consistently in that area, you're ready to write, right? So, once this exponential growth of getting new papers for every new paper that you find stops and sort of levels out, and you've essentially read everything that you can find, you're ready to start writing, right? So now you're halfway done with your review. So that lit search takes a long time to do. Okay, so then now you have this giant stack of papers. Who's read primary literature? That's what we're reading here. Anybody read primary literature? I'm assuming everyone in the front 2 rows has. So how about in the back? Anybody read? This is just like original scientific papers. Anybody? If I'm reading a primary literature article, right, there's the title, the authors, oh, here we go. First I go through the abstract, finding out what I'm looking for is included in that. Great, that's a great way to do that. So, what I'm going for here is, you'll have this giant stack of papers. You're not going to read every single word in every single one of those papers, or you'll never finish, right? So what you want to do is just what Jayani said, read the abstract. This is what I suggest to students in my lab, and this is what I do, right? I skim the title, right? Because the title should have some keywords or something relevant to what you're reviewing, right? I'll read the abstract. I'll read the intro, because oftentimes there's some really good references in the intro. Then I'll jump to the end, I'll read the conclusions, right? See what happens, like what's the point? And I'll often along the way, I'll look at the figures and the figure captions. And that's it. Then once I've done that, I'll make a decision real quick. Is this worth reading? And the answer to that depends on, does it fit my review topic? If it fits my review topic, it's worth reading. If it doesn't fit my review topic, I'll make a little note on the top and I'll put it aside, and I won't spend any more time on that paper. But I'll know that I read that paper, so I won't go through that process again when it pops up in another reference. And then now there's this flow chart, right? So does it fit the review? No. Put it away, move to the next article. If it does fit the topic, right, then you read it carefully and you take notes. And you still might not read the whole thing, right? So maybe you're reading about, you just need to read the results and discussion. You don't need to read the materials and methods section. Or maybe you only need to read the materials and methods section because you're writing a review about techniques, right? So depending on what you're going for, you'll read different sections of this paper, or maybe you'll read the whole thing. You'll take notes, right? And then put the paper away. And then you'll do a citation search on that paper, right? And then you'll move to the next article and repeat this whole process, okay? And again, you're doing this for every paper, and you can get through a lot of papers real fast this way, right? I can get through, a bunch of papers in a day doing this, or in a morning if I'm just, have a couple of hours set aside. Okay, so now I've got all of my notes from all of my papers. I've done all my lit search. How do I actually start writing? This just seems overwhelming and daunting to write this big review article after you've read all of this, right? Who thinks it sounds overwhelming? One person thinks it sounds overwhelming. Who thinks it does not sound overwhelming? No? Okay. So, right, what I like to do is I like to make a writing schedule. And so this just really helps make this giant thing that you have to write into smaller, manageable pieces that you can deal with. And so, I'll say, okay, there is 20 sections in this review article. I want to be done a month before it's due. I'm going to give myself a week for each section. So that's a month plus 20 weeks. And then that's when I'm going to have the first section done, right? So we'll just write that first section, and then we'll edit the section, and then I'll be editing while the student's writing the second section, and we'll be going back and forth that way. And so if we stick to that schedule, then by the, a month before, we'll have a draft that's, fairly decent of the entire thing. And if we fall behind schedule, which we do 100% of the time, we never make the month deadline, right? But we have a month buffer, so we can still make the actual deadline. Things come up in life and that slow you down. Right. And so dividing up a project into, bite-sized pieces, week size, day size, hour size things that you can do, right? Today, I'm going to make a figure. You make the figure, you're done, you've taken a step forward, right? It might not seem like very much, but if you take a step forward every day for a month, you've taken a lot of steps and you have a bunch of this review article done. And you haven't spent all of your time on it, right? Maybe you just spent an hour in the morning, you made that figure, and now you can go, do some reactions or chromatography, or go to class, or whatever you're doing for that day. You just blocked away time to do this every day for short pieces. And, over time that accrues into a really nice amount of work. And then share your plans, right? So rarely is there just one author on a review article. And so usually we'll divide up sections. We'll share our writing schedule, and that helps with accountability. Oftentimes, if someone else is depending on you, you're more likely to meet the deadlines, because people don't tend to let down other people. And so that's a really good way to help process along. And also, the other thing with sharing with co-authors is, as you're going, it might turn out that, you thought that these two sections were pretty even, right? You're going to write, this one section that's about 5 pages. I'll write a section that's about 5 pages, but it turns out that your section has 100 references and mine only has 10 references. Well, once we figure that out, we might redistribute some. So you'll take a little less, I'll take a little more, and then it's more even that way. But constant communication with your co-authors just helps avoid problems. And also, I learned this from my advisor in grad school. I was writing, some primary literature, and he'd be like, "Hey, how's the writing going?" And I'm like, "Oh, I've got 3 sentences." And he's like, "You've been doing this for 2 weeks. Why do you only have 3 sentences?" And I'm like, "Oh, I keep writing a sentence, then erasing it and starting over because I don't like the sentence." And so the way that he suggested doing this, and I've been doing it ever since, and it's great. And I tell everybody in my lab to do the same thing. Is it's much easier to edit than it is to write. So just, he called it a brain dump. Just dump everything from your brain onto the page as fast as possible, right? Just stream of consciousness. If you can type well, that helps a lot, right? Now you can probably just like talk into a microphone and have it, write for you, and then you can edit it, right? But just get your ideas out, right? They'll be sort of random stream of consciousness, but in your head, you've read all these papers, you know what you want to talk about in this section. Just get all those ideas down. You don't need to have a verb in every sentence. You don't need to have punctuation. Just get your ideas down, right? And then what I do is I'll print that out, right? I'm old. I like print. Maybe you guys can do this on a screen, but my eyes can't do that on the screen. So I'll print it out and I'll lay out all the pages on a big desk, and I'll just take a red pen, and I'll read it, and I'll circle things around. I'll say, oh, this section really belongs over on this page. This section belongs over on that page. And I'll just diagram the whole thing out. And then I'll take those pages and to my computer, and I'll make all those changes. And now I've got a document that, in a day, I can go through and I can add a verb to every sentence. I can add transitions between sentences. I can, say, oh, this doesn't really fit, and I can delete it. Or I can say, oh, I'm missing something here, make a little note, add a paragraph here, right? And so, but then at the end of the day, I can get 3 pages of just trash writing, but I've got 3 pages. And after a round of revision, I'll have 3 pages of really nice writing, or at least decent writing, right? A couple of rounds of revision, you'll have really nice writing. And, if you did the same thing, waiting to write the perfect sentence and then move on, that might take you a year, or you might just give up and quit because it's just so overwhelming and daunting. And so, that was one of the best pieces of advice my PhD advisor gave me on how to write like that. And yeah, so that's really good thing to keep in mind. Just get your ideas on the page and then edit them. Okay, so it's also important to avoid plagiarism, right? So when I was saying when you're reading, you're taking notes, right? When you're writing, don't have the papers around. This is what I tell the students in my lab. If you have the papers around, it's really tempting to say, oh, they worded this so beautifully in their paper, I'm just going to write that same thing in my paper, right? That's plagiarism. And so the best way to avoid plagiarism is to not tempt yourself into plagiarism. So, just write from your mind. You've read all these papers, and if that's, you can't quite do that, then take your notes, right? That's the next best thing. You've already taken notes. They're not verbatim, translations from the text. So you just take your notes and you write from your notes, okay? And then now you have this story that's in your own words. And if you do the brain dump thing, you're right, for sure they didn't write any sentences as bad as I wrote my first draft. And so then I'm editing them, and now this is all in my own voice now, in the voice of the student. And it's not the voice of the authors of the primary literature who we're trying to summarize, okay? And then when you do that, though, no one's got a perfect memory. You run the risk of saying incorrect statements. And so it's really important then that you go through and you fact check every statement that you've said and every reference that you want to add, right? And so when we're writing together, me and a student, I'll say, just put a little R or REF anywhere you think you're going to put a reference. Don't spend time putting the actual references in, because there's nothing worse than a student trying to write a perfect sentence or a perfect paragraph. They put the reference in there, and then I read it to edit and I cross off the whole paragraph, right? And that's just devastating to the students. And so I'm just like, give me your rough draft, and I'll edit it. And then once we know that we're happy with the flow of this, then we'll put the references in. And then once we have the references in, I will sit down with the student in my office. They'll have all their references on their laptop, and I will go through sentence by sentence the entire article before we submit it. And I'll say, this first sentence says this, and we cited this reference. Pull up the reference and show me why you cited that reference. And we'll make sure that it's the right, it's actually correct. And then we'll make sure it's not plagiarized. And then we'll do that for the entire review article. So for, a 200 reference review article, that's taking us, a couple of days to get through, broken up into different sections. But then we know that what we're saying is correct, and we know that we're citing the right references and we're not plagiarizing. And so teamwork helps. So, have multiple co-authors, spread the work. What you want to do before you start, though, is decide who, the author order. So you want to do that up front. Otherwise, that leads to conflict if you want to avoid conflict. But yeah, remain open to changing, right? I gave that example of, the sections weren't quite evenly distributed. And so maybe you're going to redistribute, or maybe you're going to move the person who wrote the most up to be in the lead author position, right? There's different ways to approach this, but just having open communication with co-authors and having it like a team of 2 or 3 people helping, people feed off each other in terms of energy and enthusiasm. And so that often is a really positive thing. Okay. Yeah. And then have co-authors proofread your sections, right? Have a faculty member proofread, have the co-authors proofread. The more eyes that are on here, the more mistakes you'll catch, and the better the final document will be. And then I think my group makes fun of me because I say this all the time. So perfection is the enemy of done. Okay. Don't give me what you think is the perfect draft, right? It's going to take you a month to get together, because you don't want me to take your draft and just put an X through the whole thing and say this is off topic, right? Then that's not good for anybody. Give me a rough draft, even like an outline, a meaty outline that has some sentences in it, and I can say, oh, I really like the flow of this section. I think we should add something here, or I don't think this section really fits. And then on the next round, you can be a little more polished, and then we'll make a few changes, and the next round can be a little more polished, right? And then we'll have a finished product. If you wait and do everything perfect, sometimes students don't believe me when I say this, and then I'm like, oh, you're going to give me a draft on Friday, but you didn't give me a draft, and they're like, oh, it's not good enough to share, and this kind of thing happens, and then people they get frustrated, and so it's hard mindset, I think, to share a rough draft, because everyone has pride, right? Don't have pride in science. Okay, just share your work. This is how science works, right? We're sharing ideas, we're talking back and forth. It's really beautiful once you embrace that. It's scary at first, right? You're like, oh, I only want to show my very best work to my colleagues. I don't want them thinking poorly of me, right? But if you miss the deadline, they're going to think even worse of you. So share your rough draft with them. Okay, reference managers. I don't let people in my lab use them. I like, this is like EndNote, or I think Microsoft's got one, and so what I find is they have errors in them, and so like some references will be fine, some references won't be fine. Most references will be fine, actually, but there's enough in there that aren't fine that you almost have to check all of them anyways to make sure that they're all correct. And so we just don't do it from the start in my lab. We type them all out, and then we proofread them all as we're going through. Some people don't like that in my lab, and I say, after you graduate, you can do whatever you want. And so if you're using a reference manager, that's fine, but I really encourage you to check your references, even if they're in the reference manager, because sometimes you got the wrong page number. They're just like whatever algorithm pulled it out of whatever database, they're not always right. And so they need to be checked. Okay. You might need permissions also, right? And so has anybody heard of permissions before? No? Okay, so this is largely where you're trying to use a figure from the primary literature and use it directly into your paper, right? You can't just take anything from anywhere and put it in your paper. It has to be either original. Oh, you have MMB. Okay. Have you written a review article, MMB, or where did you hear about permissions? basically, when you're writing a review article, you're not generating scientific data. You're describing other people's data. So if you want to show that data, you need permission to do it. And the authors of the papers don't own that anymore. The journals own it. So you have to, contact the journal and ask for permission to use these figures in your review article. And it used like the first one I wrote as a grad student, I had to actually like mail these forms like slow mail with stamps, and now it's all online. They can get like students get do this in like an hour. They can get all these permissions, and there's just an online form. Every journal has a different form slightly, but you'll put your name in, what figures you want from what paper, why you're using them, how many you're going to use from the paper, and usually they just say, yep, you have permission, and then you just save that permission so that if anybody asks, you can say, oh yeah, I had permission to do this. And usually there's some kind of language that they want in the figure caption that says that they gave you permission. And so, here's one example from the ACS. Here's one from Wiley. Every publisher is a little bit different. Sometimes they want money, right? So they'll say, oh, you can use my figure, but it will cost you $1,000, right? Or I use some Sri Lankan rupees in the picture here instead of US dollars. So yeah, they're going to charge. And I can tell you, I have never paid a permission charge, because anytime a journal says they want money to use their figure, I say we are not going to use that figure, and we'll find a different figure, and we just that's fine. Your article is not getting highlighted as much in my review article now, because like I don't know, I don't have $1,000 extra to just give to a journal to use a figure. So you've done the lit search, you've done the writing, you've got all the permissions, you checked your references, you sent this thing out for peer review, right? So peer reviews where scientists at other universities will read your article and critique it. Are you done? Who thinks you're done at this point? Who thinks you're not done? You submitted the paper. Are you done? Let's just take a poll. Everyone has to raise their hand for one of these two things. So it's going to be, do you think you're done, or do you not think you're done? So do you think you're done after you submit it? Raise your hand. Okay, good, because you're not done. Everybody raised their hand. That's great. So after you submit this, it might be months. You might not hear anything for months, right? So you get a little break, reprieve. Like peer review can be really, really slow because they're sending these things out to very busy people to read, and review articles tend to be large, and so it takes a long time to get through them, to read them critically. Can you go forward one? Right, but you're going to get comments back, and they might just be personally devastating. They'll be like, oh, you missed this. I had one review once. I was an assistant professor, and I got this review. It was like, yeah, it was so horrible. It said, I have more papers on my desk right now about subsection 3 or whatever than this person, has probably ever read, right? It was just like very critical. And so we ended up, adding a bunch more papers in there, right? And so, be prepared to make major changes, okay? You might not, but I've never had any paper or review, primary literature, anything come back without changes, right? As a reviewer, when I'm reviewing for other people, I sort of take it as my obligation to like find ways to help them improve the manuscript, find things that are wrong, because I'm protecting, as a reviewer, scientific knowledge that's going out. And this is, at first I thought this was really scary, right? I'm like, oh, I'm sending this out, they're critiquing me, I'm taking it very personally. None of it's personal, right? This is how science works. And when you think of it that way, it's a very beautiful thing. All these very busy people are taking time out of their very busy schedule to read what you wrote and give you, very detailed feedback. I mean, you don't get that very often. And it's a really nice thing when you think about it that way. And so, sometimes they're wrong. That's fine. But they spent their time trying to help. And so think about it that way, and don't take it personally. But be prepared to respond to everything that they say, right? And so respond could be one of two things. Respond is you make the change, right? Maybe they're like, that reviewer that said that, they had more papers than I've ever read. Well, you know what? I added a bunch of papers in that topic. We did some kind of keyword miss search, and we found a bunch of papers afterwards, and so we added a new section to that paper, right? And that's fine, right? Um, at other times, they want a couple of references added, or they think something should be different, but make the change. But if they're wrong, just politely say why you shouldn't make the change, and you don't have to agree with the reviewers. That's what this is, a dialogue between you and the editor, or between you and the reviewers, that's moderated by the editor, right? So it's really important to just do what's right. And if the reviewer's wrong, don't call them an idiot, but just say, hey, we respectfully disagree with you on this one, and here's why. Always say why, right? Oh, you think that we should change this, but if you look at so and so's paper from 1982, it showed this other thing, and that's why we're not going to make this change, right? So if you support why you're not making change with a rational argument, the editor is likely to agree with you. Okay, so that's really important to do. Now, if you respectfully disagree with everything that a reviewer says, the editor is probably not going to let that go, right? So, suck up your pride, find some low-hanging fruit, make some of the changes at least, right? Because that's they took some time and do that. But you don't have to do something that you disagree with. Also, a common thing that reviewers will do is they'll propose things that are outside the scope of what you're doing, right? They're critiquing a paper that they wish they had read, not the paper that you wrote. And so oftentimes, I'll write, we think this is a great idea, but it's outside the scope of what we're trying to do here. And so we didn't make this change, but we think this might be a good thing for a future study. And so thank you for the idea, right? And that's totally fine to do. So there's really like this art form. The former chair of the department, Jing Rigby, when I was assistant professor, my very first paper I sent to JAX, and it got rejected. But like the reviews were fairly good, but I think they were the one reviewer was just off in what he was thinking. And then I went and I told him, and he's like, oh, you should fight that, like send it back in, even though they rejected it. And I'm like, you can do that? And he's like, how do you think people publish in JAX all the time? Like, apparently everybody does that. So I sent back in this detailed rebuttal. Well, here's why I think the review was wrong, and here's but I made some of these changes anyways. Just I took the liberty of making the changes, but I didn't make these changes, and that thing got in. And I'm probably 60-40 when I fight a rejection to get in the journal. So apparently that's really common. And so usually with reviews, you're not going to get outright rejected, but saying something's outside the scope, or just being polite, even if you're perceiving them as not polite, is what you need to do here. Don't take reviews personally. So this is hard to do the first few that you get, right? I remember as a postdoc, we got these reviews back, and it was major revisions, and it was just I think there was more text in the review than there was in my actual paper, of just comments, and I'm just like, oh, they hated it. And Laura Kiesling, my postdoc advisor, came in and she's like, congratulations, they loved the paper. And I was like, really? That, like, it's so many comments. And she's like, oh, they would reject it if they didn't like it. They gave you major revisions. They want to see it published, but they want these changes to be made, right? So you just thoughtfully go through and you make the changes, or you disagree with the changes, and then you go on, right? And that's the process. But this process takes time, right? And you want to make sure it's done well, right? So what you don't want to do is you spend a year doing a lit search, writing this paper, proofreading it, checking the references, you get all these comments back, and you spend a week cramming some changes in there, right? And then it lessens your paper, even though they're probably better things, right? So you'll read a paper, you'll read a review article, and you'll say, wow, that section just seems out of place. Probably that was something that was done really quickly in response to a review, right? And it kind of ruined the feel for the whole paper, right? So you want to put as much effort into responding to this review as you put into writing the thing in the first place, because the final product, it's not separated into, first submission, second submission pieces. It's just one whole review article. And so you want the whole thing to be at the same level of effort that you put into the beginning. And like, another reason not to take things personally, I'm not saying anything about anybody in here. Scientists tend to be, introverts. They tend to not be great at like interpersonal skills sometimes. And so, don't read tone into what they're writing. It's not personal. They're thinking about science, and no one's trained in tactfulness. And then just keep that in mind when you're reviewing for other people, and then try and be supportive and not you know rude. But it's hard to do. That just takes practice. Okay, so probably you're thinking this sounds horrible. A lot of work, a lot of like struggling and effort. You know, why in the world would you want to do this? Anybody? Raise your hand if you think you never want to write a review now after hearing this. That means everyone wants to write a review. So why might you want to write a review? Anybody? Online in the room? Anybody? To find research gaps. Yeah. So if you're trying to get into an area, thank you, Kasuni. If you want to get into a new research area, it's a great way to find research gaps and find where there's a need for things to do research on, right? And so that's a really good reason to do a review article, to write one. Anybody else? Oh, to share, yeah. Ravina, to share through knowledge on a particular topic, to share Nunrada, to share knowledge. Yeah, these are great reasons. So thank you for typing them in. Are there any more on here? To gather evidence for research, right? So getting into a research area, in my mind, that's like the best reason to do this. But yeah, these to share knowledge, to clarify and resolve conflicts. Yeah, that's a good one. Nipuni, I didn't even talk about that. So oftentimes you'll see like a conflict in the area, right? So a good example from the mid 1990s. Who's heard of DNA? No one's heard of DNA. That was a trap. Everyone should have heard of DNA. Really? Okay. So there was this big debate in the mid 1990s whether DNA was a conductor or an insulator, right? And that sounds ridiculous and trivial, but like people were getting mad about this, and they'd just say, "Oh, it's an insulator," and everybody that says it's a conductor is wrong, and the people would, "No, it's a conductor. Here's this experiment showing it's a conductor," and then, "Oh, that experiment's flawed. Here's why," and, "Oh no, your experiment's flawed," and like it was a huge debate, right? And so having someone write a review article saying, well, here's the points from this side and here's the points from that side, can really help people get a airplane level view of a topic, and say, oh, well, maybe it's somewhere in the middle, or maybe it really is over here because of the preponderance of evidence in the literature is over here. So yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, to clarify and resolve conflicts. Thank you, Nipuni. Dayani, to get more knowledge on a particular topic, find new research approaches. That's really good. Yep. Anybody in the room now that online's warming you up here? No? Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. We can go back to the slides, right? To become an expert in an area, right? You're new to a PhD program. You're trying to make a contribution to science, to show you're an independent scientist. It's hard to do that if you don't know what's already been done. So doing a deep dive and becoming an expert in an area is a good reason to do this, right? To have an opportunity to work with experts, right? You join someone's lab, and you really get a chance to know them well, working with them on a project like this. And so that's a great thing to build your network. And maybe you're working with a collaborator on this in a different university also. And so you're right, it's a chance to really work with experts in the field and learn from them. If you're writing a thesis, it's a great opportunity to publish a thesis chapter, right? To contextualize your research. Maybe you're new to an area, you made some great discovery, but you're not really on the radar of the main people in the field. Well, you can write a review article that summarizes the field and shows how your contribution fits in the field, and how it's propelled the field forward, and to really contextualize the research that you are doing, or if you're invited, right? So, and those are the things that I came up with when I was thinking about this. And whatever you're doing, Um, Writing is really important. I'll give you another story from when I was a postdoc, right? I was writing a paper, and my postdoc advisor came in the office with the draft that I'd given her, and she said, "Oh, you're a terrible writer. This is a horrible draft." And I was crushed, right? And then she said, "Oh, don't worry, I'm a terrible writer too," right? And this is Laura Kiesling, National Academy of Science member, editor in chief of ACS Chemical Biology. I'm like, "You're not a terrible writer," and she's like, "Oh, I just work at it a lot." And she's like, "Ever since I left grad school, I've been reading a new book on how to write scientifically every single year." And so ever since then, I've been doing the same thing. I got like a library of scientific writing books in my office. I try and get a new one every year. And two of my favorites are these two on the board here. So uh, the Write Like a Chemist. This is a really good one. It is it follows the ACS style guide, so American Chemical Society style guide, and it's got sections on how to write a paper, how to make a poster presentation, how to write I think there's a grant proposal section in there, and so it sort of gives you information on what to include, and then it gives you problem sets at the end of each chapter, right? So I take these problems and I use them in my group meeting with my research group to like help them become better writers. But the really cool thing about this book that I like is if you take your research and you follow the problem sets at the end of the chapters, by the time you get to the end of the section on writing a paper, you'll have a draft of a paper that's ACS style for your research project. And so it's a really cool way to get a first draft when you're new to writing papers. The other one that I like is this sense of structure. This one, Laura Kiesling gave it to me when she told me that I was a terrible writer. And so this was her favorite, and it's my favorite too. This by Gopin. So Gopin is not a scientist, and this isn't even about science. This is about he used the scientific method to find out where people expect to see things in their writing, in what they're reading. And so it's not about what you're trying to give the reader, it's about where the reader expects to find things to receive them, right? And so everybody reads differently. And so he's got all these surveys in here. He wrote a sentence 5 different ways, and he asked people, like 100 people what it meant, and 20% said it meant this thing, 80% said it meant that thing, and then he looked at where the parts of the sentence were to get the most people to convey the meaning that he wanted to convey. And so, right, you'll never write something that everyone will understand, but using the tips in here, you can get a lot of people to, you can maximize the number of people that are appreciating and receiving the message that you're trying to give them. And so I really appreciate sort of the scientific approach that a non-scientist took to figuring out how to communicate with people. So writing from the reader's perspective, that's what it's all about. So I think that's my last slide. These slides, by the way, are on this laptop. And so if anyone wants copies, whoever's in charge of the laptop can give them to you, or you can email me and I'm happy to share them too. So I'm happy to take any questions from either online or in the room too.
Thank you very much for your excellent talk. Actually, I felt like I'm at the ACS conference or something like that. You took me like a couple of years back to US. Ah. And my question is, actually, I'm asking this question on behalf of our students. Okay. How do you distinguish between plagiarism and paraphrasing? Which one is more important? Which one to avoid? How do we distinguish this?
Yeah, it's tricky. Paraphrasing, there you sort of get into this mosaic plagiarism where you take a sentence and you change like every third word, right? That's called mosaic plagiarism. And so some people think of that as paraphrasing, but really it's not. I mean, I think of paraphrasing, which is fine, as taking some text and an idea and a topic and putting it in your own words, right? And so maybe they wrote a page and you're condensing that to a paragraph. Well, to do that, you're going to have to use your own words to get it down to that paragraph, not just take 4 sentences from what they wrote in their page. Plagiarism is copying verbatim, or mosaic plagiarism, copying verbatim and then trying to like look like you're not doing that by changing every third word. And this is why I think it's really important to write when you're actually writing to not have the references nearby, because then it just, you don't have a chance to plagiarize because you can't look at what was there. You're just writing it from your mind. Does that answer your question?
Plagiarism, is it like very common in non-native speakers, or do you find that with your experience, is it common in native speakers? Both parties.
I find that it's common in junior scientists. So anybody that's new, doesn't matter where they were born, they like, there's just like a gut instinct, like, because I think, you know, in elementary school and wherever, you're just like, oh, I looked up this reference, I'm writing this report, so I'll copy from Wikipedia and put it in here, and then put a reference that says Wikipedia or whatever, or maybe not. And you know, I think in third grade, fourth grade, that's probably fine because they want you to just like learn about the topic. But then when you're writing something that's new, it has to be new, and that's a hard transition for anybody to find, regardless of where they're from. Oh, questions online. Okay. So I'm looking at Gianni's question. Professor, for a graduate student, would you recommend systematic review or narrative review as a first attempt? You know, Gianni, I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. You're probably not writing this on your own. You're probably writing this with an advisor. All right. So I'm a faculty member. I would say have a discussion with them and talk through, make a list of the pros and cons of both types of review and how they align with what you're trying to do. And then, pick one and don't look back. Go with that one. Then Priyangi, sorry if this is controversial. What do you think about use of AI in scientific writing? I think you should avoid it, AI in scientific writing. I think, if you're writing an email or a cover letter and you want AI to clean up the grammar, fine, send it in there, right? If you're writing a grant proposal or a publication, you do not want to dump that into AI because it's no longer yours. Like AI owns all of that, right? And now they're like, so I'm on grant review panels, and apparently some grant reviewers were just putting the grants into AI and saying write a review, right? And so, but now the problem is that contains, those grant proposals contain proprietary information, and that the person that wrote that grant proposal doesn't want to get out there, and now the AI company owns it because it's fed into their system. So, right, I think in general, in terms of writing, write on your own. And it's a really good skill to have to be able to write. I think AI is really good for cleaning things up. I think, AI can sound really nice. I think AI can also, it's getting better and better, but from what I've seen when people have tried to use it, references are just trash. Like it just makes up references. And so, that is, do the work. Because the other thing is, if you're trying to become an expert in the field and you're just like, hey, chat GPT, write a review on transcriptomics, then you're not becoming an expert on transcriptomics, right? AI is becoming an expert on transcriptomics. So, right, you're sort of defeating the purpose of doing this in the first place. So nothing's free, nothing's easy. If you want to learn, you have to put you get out of it as much as you put into it. And I think, with some of this AI for actual writing, it's just, you're robbing yourself of becoming an expert. Okay, Ravina, sir, if we are using any AI model for correcting grammar, like Grammarly or chat, will it cause issues with plagiarism detection in Turnitin? I don't know about Turnitin, but I know that plagiarism and AI detection software are just terrible. So I know that, we have that software at Wayne State, and we're not allowed to fail students if they get caught by it because it's inconclusive. And so it's probably your best bet is to have a collaborator and like have all your collaborators proofread for each other, right? That's the safest. But if you want to use Grammarly or something to clean up the grammar, I think it's probably fine, because you're the one that wrote this. And I think if an editor comes back and says, hey, this got flagged on Turnitin, then you can say, well, you know what? Here's what happened. I wrote this. Here's the draft. Save the draft of your own writing, right? Here's what I put in chat in Grammarly to like fix the grammar, and then here's the final product. And you can see, it's not plagiarized because I actually wrote it. I just used this to clean up the grammar. And I think you'll win the argument with the editor as long as you have the evidence to support that. You're the one that actually did the writing to start with. Now, I can't speak for every editor, but if I was an editor, I would be fine with that. Guyani, is it good to use plagiarism software or AI to check ourselves? Oh, good, such a loaded word. I don't know. I don't. I don't know that if my students do, they don't tell me that they do. But I never turn back a draft to them that doesn't have a bunch of red on it from my pen. I feel that's my job. So even if they are, I don't always like what it's doing if that's what they're doing. I don't know. I probably wouldn't, but I wouldn't hold it against you if you did. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for this one. This is a gray area. I think, the scientific community as a whole is just sort of getting ambushed by AI, and we're having to make up ethics codes in real time as we deal with this. And so, I think if it feels like cheating, stay away from it, right? If it doesn't, and you can make an argument that it's not, right, that's based in strong principles, then more power to you. So, Udayana, hello, professor. What is the best way to check plagiarism? I found that the best way to check plagiarism is exactly what I said in the talk. I sit down, actually make students highlight why they cited each paper, and then we'll go through reference by reference, line by line, the entire thing, and I'll say, there's a reference on this sentence, show me the paper where it got cited from, and then I'll look at that text, and then I'll relook at the text that's there, and I'll make sure it's correct, but then I'll also make sure that it's not plagiarized, right? Every once in a while, I'll say like, oh, you know what? That sentence looks exactly the same, right? Maybe you remembered it and you wrote it there, but we can't have that in there, and we changed the sentence. And it's slow and it's tedious, but we catch everything because we go line by line, And so in my mind, that's the best way. But maybe I'm old fashioned. All right, could you recommend good application to draw molecular structures and scientific figures? So I love ChemDraw, but I'm a chemist, and so I do a lot with chemistry. I know if you're more biochem, ChemDraw's got some biochem type things in there. It's not the best. So people like was it like BioRender? I think people like to use. Having access to a copy of Photoshop, you can like merge different colors or change colors to make figures. Some of my students like to use PowerPoint, and then we'll save that as like a TIFF and then open it up in Photoshop and change the text or things. There's lots of different ways, but molecular structures, nothing beats ChemDraw in my opinion, because you can change the bond lengths and the angles and it's designed for that purpose. So in my mind, ChemDraw is the best for molecular structures. Any other questions from in the room? I think if you're thinking of like taking text, putting it in a paraphrasing software and having that spit something out for you, I would avoid that, because I think that while it's probably giving you a paraphrase, you're not growing as a scientist. You're not growing as a writer, right? Writing is hard work. Writing takes effort. If there's ways to help, right? So like clearly like computers are easier than typewriters, right? But I think if you're not actually writing, then you're not writing. So are you an author then? If you're just taking text and you're spitting it through Mandalay and it's paraphrasing it, and sticking all this paraphrasing together, are you really an author or is Mandalay the author? So I don't know. I wouldn't recommend doing that. I would just, read a lot, learn a lot, write what you think, and then check to make sure that that's correct. Yep. And if I came back and talked about this in 10 years, I might say something completely different. But where I'm at right now, this is my thought process. Things evolve over time.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that wonderful, inspiring, and interactive session on scientific review techniques and practices. We are very fortunate and honored to have you here today.